Hey, this is Dan Barrett from Always Be Watching. I'm joined by Kyle is it Secor or Secor?
Secor.
Secor. I've always
But
just said Secor, but
I've gotten used to Secor, so or whatever.
awkward. Well, we've heard Kyle now, but I'm just going to do my intro spiel anyway. Dan Barrett from alwaysbewatching.com, talking to Kyle Secor, star of Homicide, Life on the Streets, and also just a whole wealth of TV shows and movies you may have seen over the years. You may have seen him in Veronica Mars. Commander-in-Chief is a title which I think people would remember pretty fondly. The Flash, I think you did 2 or 3 episodes of that. Every year you've got like 2 or 3 credits to your name. But anyway, joined by Kyle Secor, we're going to talk Homicide, we're going to talk about a few other things. Kyle, thanks so much for your time.
Oh, I'm so happy to be here. It's so great to speak to someone who's in Australia. My wife is there right now.
Okay, what's she doing here?
She's teaching and directing. She's out over
wow.
in Melbourne. Yeah.
Okay.
Doing some stuff with some people there.
Yeah, fantastic. I guess that's why you've been so prolific in terms of the newsletter and podcast that you're putting out.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a bit more free time.
Keep it going.
Yeah, so look, Homicide, like I'm slightly just uncomfortably nervous talking to Kyle because he's been such an important part of my TV. I was saying this before we started recording. The cultural DNA of me is very much built off the work that Kyle was doing on Homicide. So it just hit at the right age for me. As a young person turning into like a tween, I was very much at a comic book focus, but in my early teens, I found a little show called The X-Files, which kind of led me over to some more grown-up storytelling with things like Homicide, Life on the Streets. So it was just, I started watching when I was 14 or 15, and I kind of thought that all adult grown-up storytelling was going to be as good as Homicide, Life on the Streets, and I was very disappointed as I got further into life to realize that, no, that was just a really good TV program.
Yeah. I was. When I left Homicide, I felt the same way when I would go to work on other shows.
Look, I was wondering about that. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're on it, it doesn't. It's the writing was so good, so consistently for so long, and it just felt like, oh, that's the way the world is. But once you got off Homicide and started going to some other shows, I was just feeling, oh wow, it really that was an amazing show to be a part of. I took it for granted a little bit.
Yeah.
And
And not that you were necessarily on some bad shows after Homicide.
No, not at all. Not at all. But there was just a quality of how they wrote and how they took care of the words and the language and stuff like that was just different.
But production style as well. Like you were really filming in an entirely different way on Homicide than you were on, say, Commander-in-Chief.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, Commander-in-Chief was pretty classical in terms of, taking long time to set up lights and specific lights for people. In Homicide, we just put a Chinese lantern on the end of a stick and held it over and said, "Okay, go, start acting," and people just came up with stuff.
My wife, who never watched Homicide growing up, but she's been watching over my shoulder the last couple of weeks while I've been sort of blitzing through it.
You did it.
Well, she hasn't actually actively sat on the couch yet, but I can see that she's like frosting at the moment. Give it another week or two and she'll find her way through like a full episode. But she was watching some of the earlier episodes, which, to those who haven't seen them, on Peacock at the moment in the US, they've cleaned up the show quite a fair bit visually. They've remastered the program, and a lot of the grain and grit that really was part of the first couple of seasons of the show especially has been cleaned up and sort of taken out of it. But she was walking past looking at that screen and said, "Oh, the sets look so obviously fake." But as you would be well aware, like this was shot very much in a real building with real light. And I just found it kind of interesting that she had that reaction, something which was so authentic.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Interesting because even though, and I think that Peacock kind of cleaning it up, which in many ways it just kind of, really clarifies things. You can see things so much more cleanly. It does make some places look like a set because it takes off all the dirt and everything that was present at all times. But I still look at it and I don't see sets at all. I mean, I see all the places we shot in, which were very real.
Yeah, I mean, you were there, so it's a little bit, different.
Yeah. But it is funny, I was looking at a couple of shows today because we're doing the next episode that we're doing on the podcast. Bruce Paltrow directed.
Oh wow!
And but Bruce has been around for a long time, and he's the one who brought on Tom Fontana to do Saint Elsewhere and things like that. And then but before that, he did something called The White Shadow,
Of course, yep.
And if you look at those things, they're so obviously on sets, like they're shooting in a gymnasium, but so obviously in like one little corner of a gymnasium where, like what we would do if we were shooting in a gym, you would know you were in a gym. You could smell the sweat. But and White Shadow is a great show. It's one of my favorites growing up. But looking at it now, I go, oh yeah, that's a set.
Sorry, speaking of sweat, I hadn't planned to ask you about this, but I have to. So, as I said, my wife's been walking past the TV watching things, and anytime that particularly in the first and second season, whenever Daniel Baldwin was on screen, clearly you guys were filming in the middle of summer, he is a sweaty, sweaty, sweaty man. But every time I was looking at you and seeing straight afterwards, you're not sweating a single bead. And I was just wondering, like, is that just, Daniel Baldwin just like leaning into the physical response of his environment, or are you just naturally a very sort of cool, calm, collected person?
I think I'm a naturally a non-sweaty person. We also, Danny and I have just different body types, and we were like in different physical condition and stuff like that. But
I appreciate he had some other stuff going on as well. But that's
yeah. We all did. Everyone. I only knew of one person who didn't have anything going on. It was just as clean as a whistle. But yeah, it was a pretty messy, chaotic set.
Yeah, folks can read into that however they choose. Look, so I've been watching these first couple of seasons over the last few weeks, and what really struck me, and this is something I hadn't really appreciated until just being a bit older in life, sort of seeing it, is that I'm seeing your character, Tim Bayliss, entering the show. He's a real outlier, or at least, I mean, also, it's kind of like you're a bit of an outlier as well, in that you're pretty new to the industry. Tim Bayliss is a pretty young man who's kind of entering, the homicide department for the first time. He's an outlier. And I'm watching these long-established character actors and younger guys who are on a pathway to becoming reliable character actors for decades to come. But you're the only one on screen who, from first glance, kind of looks like a traditional actor on a cop show. But you start coming at it. But you start coming at it with like this sort of, I wouldn't call it a nervous energy, but it's like an uncomfortable energy. And you're really sort of looking a little bit sort of shaggy, and I'm trying to find even like the right word for it. You're kind of a bit doofusy, I guess, on screen as well. Like, you're not carrying yourself like a normal leading man. And I was wondering how much of that is you making choices as an actor to fit in amongst all these other character actors, or how much of that's actually on the page.
Gosh, it's one of the most wonderful descriptions of the character and of me as an actor, because I think when I came on there, I felt all of that. It was a little bit intimidating. There was Ned Beatty, and there was John Polito, and there was Yaphet Kotto, and there were like, and it was a little sweat inducing, even though I didn't sweat. And I never, another thing is I never saw myself as a leading man. And it's funny, Reed has said the same thing to me. He said, I never saw myself as a leading man. And I didn't either. I just saw myself as an actor who came and did the best work that they could do, given the circumstances that the character was in. And so some of it comes across as just, like you said, doofy. Sometimes I look at myself on camera and go, oh, come on, get over it. You're too sensitive. Come on, and I wish that I would have made another choice. You can't do that. But I looking now as an older person, looking at that younger Kyle, want to just grab him and shake him sometimes. But so that, in many ways, that's where I was at in my life. And that's where I was at with all of those other actors, in the room. And the one that I felt the most comfortable with eventually was Andre. And that kind of, so when our relationship started settling in, I think that I started settling into the character. That started defining who the character was a bit more to me, rather than just the new guy on the block. I had something to kind of fight against and to,
Look, I mean, generally in life, they talk about this idea of having a dream job, and that after a while, it starts to feel like just an ordinary job. Now, as you said, Homicide had you working alongside some pretty well-known and respected character actors, and you talked about that intimidation. But I was wondering how long it was until you just started seeing them as colleagues for all the good and bad that can come with that.
First episode. I think when I started seeing them as human beings, kind of just dealing with their own shit in life, and their own issues and stuff, that then we were all, like, as they say, putting on our shoes one shoe at a time, or whatever that saying is, putting on our pants one leg at a time. And at that point, I wasn't really, Yeah, I wasn't intimidated anymore. The only person I've really felt that thing through an entire season of being just intimidated was working with Donald Sutherland.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah, commander in chief. But no, Yaphet and those guys after the first episode, that was kind of over with. I didn't feel intimidated at all. We and I think it's also, you're right. We had a bunch of young actors we were hungry as hell to work on this great material, and we were ready to go. And we would, the camera could be anywhere. It didn't even have to be in the room, and we would act. We would act for free, and that was a different situation for Yaphet and for Ned. I mean, they had many, many more years under their belt acting in a specific way and they had a little more struggle with that. And we were, going 1,000 miles an hour, and they were in a way playing catch up with us. As good as they were. I mean, it was the new that new style of shooting, of filming, worked for a lot of us, the younger.
Yeah. Yeah, the thing I keep on sort of thinking about is that you've got this amazing bench of talent on that program, but at the same time, you've also got Andre Braugher in there, who, when you watch Homicide, it's hard not just to be completely blown away by Andre when he's on screen. And based on the character, like, there's a lot that sort of allows him to really sort of, I guess, be noticed on the show. But at the same time,
off the screen.
Yeah. Look, I'm trying to be polite about this, because the problem is he's just really, really good. And I was wondering how the sort of older cast members sort of reacted to the idea that I'm sure they all came onto it thinking that, I'm the one that's going to really be bringing the gravitas to this program. But then you got this young upstart coming through who's just, doing what he does.
I'm not sure. I think, it's funny. I had heard this story that the show was going to revolve around John Polito. He was going to be the guy.
Really?
Isn't that odd?
Yeah.
That's just an odd thing. But I heard that was like, and I went, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And then they quickly pivoted from there. And, I think if there was anyone who was a little intimidated by Andre, it was probably Yaphet.
Yeah.
Young black man and older black man. And there was a little bit, but it was useful for their characters. And, but really, truly, the writers wrote so vibrantly towards all of the characters that no one was ever going, oh, Andre's going to blow up from this. There wasn't any thinking about that at all. It was just like, what are the values in the scene? That's all we ever thought. The one time I remember Andre came out of the box after an interrogation, like strolled out of the box, and Richard Belzer said, "I smell an Emmy." And like I said to Reed, I thought he was, because I was in the box too. And for an instant, I thought, well, I mean, I was pretty good in the box, but I was mostly reacting. But if that's an M, and then I realized he was talking about Andre. And that's the first time that I kind of went, oh, Andre's a little different.
Yeah.
And as the show went on, I mean, I saw that definitely. I mean, he's just a brilliant actor, but it never intimidated anyone on the set. Again, it was, maybe he and Yaphet had some moments, but it was never anything that everyone was just there to do great work.
Yeah. One of the things I've really liked about the newsletter and podcast that you've launched in the last couple of months is it's very honest, and it's pretty clear you had difficulty working with some actors like Yaphet Kotto on screen. I'm not sure if I've really got a question here, but I guess the thing that comes to my mind is that as you're watching Homicide, it becomes really quite evident, and this is, I guess, largely from the fact that it was largely an older cast in the program. We have had a number of actors pass away since then. The fact that there's, I guess, maybe so few remaining cast members, does that make it a little bit easier to be that honest in terms of thinking about those times on the show?
No one wants to. People want to hold up their people that they love, and they want to hold them up. I
mean, I don't think you're being disrespectful at all when I say this at all.
No. I'm just saying that in terms of writing about it, I try to be very mindful and very thoughtful about it. On the show, Reed and I have talked about this a lot, because there was a lot of incredibly bad behavior, but there was a lot of bad behavior on a lot of shows that no one's ever heard about from, up and even probably till now, but certainly in the 90s, oh my God, or the 80s, good God. So I try to be very kind of mindful about that, and also knowing there's people still have family members out there and all of that stuff. But to me, like you said, we had a hard time acting with them on screen. It was never on screen that it was difficult. It was when the cameras went off. That's when it was difficult. When the cameras went on, that was just folded into the work, and it helped the work. Again, Tom Fontana and I have talked about this, and we've remarked at how amazing that this show was as good as it was exactly because of the bad behavior. Did we want that to be there? No. Did I want to? Because I was one of the people that had I was doing things as well. So I think if you're in the group and you can talk about the group that you're in, that's okay. If I'm on the outside and I never did anything wrong, or I never passed out while I was acting, then I'm not the guy to be talking about that stuff. But I did, so I can talk about it.
Look, if I don't ask this, I'll just regret it for years to come. So I've heard you mention on the podcast a couple of times, and you just said it then, you're involved in some pretty bad behavior. When you think back to your time, what was the worst thing you did?
Oh, passing out while acting.
Okay, that's a pretty big one.
Not nodding off while acting.
Yeah.
And then being woken up and the scene starting again, and then nodding off again, and then being woken up and just going, the main thing is just don't fall back to sleep, and then nodding off again. And so that was, to me, who I pride myself on being a professional, I had just reached a certain point working on the show that the line that I had drawn between what I did after work and what I did during work, that line got obliterated by the fourth season. And only when I almost basically died did I finally get sober and come back and and put the work in that I really, really, truly felt like I was supposed to be putting in, and not messing around with it.
Yeah. So you went sober while you were making the show?
Yeah, for the first 4 seasons, definitely not.
Yeah.
So it was, but it's a funny thing, I thought that I thought I was pretty wrecked sometimes. And when I like in the 5th season, when I went up to the DP and, I made my amends to him and stuff, he said, "What are you talking about?" And I thought, oh my God, I was so good. I could hide it so well. But there were a few of us that were doing things like that. And, but a lot of that, the bad behavior had nothing to do with addiction. It had to do with mental health. A lot of it was mental health.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some of it was addiction. Some of it was addiction, but much of it was mental health as well.
I mean, you've talked about this a little bit on the podcast as well, but I think the environment that they created for Homicide probably makes it quite easy to be able to sort of lean into those urges and impulses a bit more and be a bit less professional. You were isolated way in Baltimore, which obviously isn't sort of where most things are made on a regular, so it's a different environment. Yeah. Yeah,
no, it was everything that we were the only game in town, really, except for the sports teams. So anything that you wanted was available to you, and you could get it quite quickly. And if you were out on location shooting and you wanted to, something to, get through the evening or something, that was available as well. So we took full advantage. Many of us took full advantage of that. People weren't showing up from Hollywood. People weren't showing up from the network to hang out on the set. It was, a producer, a writer, the director, and the rest of the crew. And sometimes they knew what was going on. Sometimes they didn't. But also, we were doing the work. We were putting in the work, and stuff. The stuff that they were seeing was great. So it wasn't that it was allowed to happen. It's just there was no other way to do it in terms of how they had set it up in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And if you talk to people from the crew or from other actors, they didn't have that experience. Some of them, it's a thing that happened and they moved on to the next job. There's other people like myself or some others that it's, Homicide is, kind of taken up some property in our heads, and we've, and I forgot about it for years. I didn't talk about it. I let it go for many, many years until last year when Richard and Andre passed away. And then I started started kind of coming back to me that I'd forgotten everything. And I don't feel good about that, the thing that I had done. And I wanted to go into it and write about it and see what it was.
Yeah. Now, I was thinking for the first couple of seasons of the show, it kind of feels as a viewer it's a little bit rocky from a cast perspective. So by the end of season 3, we've seen the end of actors like Ned Beatty, Daniel Baldwin, John Polito from the show. And I was thinking, as an actor, is that difficult to sort of contend with as these sort of big names are exiting the program? Like, sure, did you ever feel like your tenure on the show was possibly at risk as well?
There's a couple of things. Yes, you miss the energy, but you also are happy the energy is gone.
Okay.
Because it was a very disruptive set. I mean, Ned had a lot of stuff going on. That guy had a lot of stuff. He was a volcano. And so he made the set sometimes incredibly difficult to be on. Same with a couple of the other, Polito and Danny, and great love them both. And it just made it very difficult. Now you go to the other end of the spectrum. By season 7, you've got everyone is sober, everyone's happy. They brought in these people and you could argue that season 7 is a bit of a meh. There's some good episodes here and there, but we had lost that, the tension that was needed, or the tension that we had for all those years.
Yeah.
And those first 2 seasons, as rocky as they were, there was some great work, consistently great work.
Yeah. I'm currently in season 4, and you do already feel like that sort of energy is sort of slightly out of it. Like there's that sort of old guard sort of brought something undefinable to the show.
Yeah. Definitely. Ned was, what was this? There was a scene where he arrests a guy crossing a crosswalk, and he's with Munch, and they take him down, and he's just standing there with his gun behind his back, smoking a cigar, saying, "I'm your best friend, man. Just take it easy. I'm your best friend." And you believed him. Ned you believed everything that he did. He was just a great presence.
This is one of the things with Homicide, and certainly as I've been rewatching this now, I'm in season 4, and I can't really think of that many false moments through the show. Like, there's nothing that feels overly actorly. Like, it all feels fairly genuine and, I guess, of Baltimore.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have a good character actor like Baltimore is there for you at all times to keep you honest. It really is. Because you couldn't be on the street with all the people that were on the street and the extras they used and stuff and be doing bad acting. They just didn't get bad actors. They got people that loved words and loved the material and loved stories and wanted to tell the story in the best way possible. And they got people that were good at that. And so it was very rare to see a false moment. And oh my God, the guest actors that they brought in, even for the smallest roles, there were some unbelievable people. Do you remember the guy who was the head of the cemetery, who ran the cemetery?
Yeah.
That guy was just like a local Baltimore guy that they brought in. He's unbelievable.
But then you sort of look at the counter side, and there was an episode, I think it's the season 3 finale, that has Bruno Kirby in there. And it kind of feels like that's one of the notes that actually felt a little bit false to me. He just kind of felt a little bit too traditionally, like it seemed like a guest star role as opposed to that guy that you're speaking about who's authentic.
Sure. Yeah. And I think that that's something that they had to work with guest actors that came in that were like you said, traditionally like Bruno or someone else who were used to
Robin Williams is probably one of the great examples there.
Yeah. But Robin was ready at that point, and he wanted to do something really dramatic. And he had worked with Barry many times before, and he was obviously an improviser, and he was willing to do whatever it took to play that role. And he put himself completely into it. And some people had a little more difficult time and kind of did their shtick when they came to the set. And, they filmed it and it would be what it would be, and they would cut around certain things. But, you get a performance like, and I love Bruno, and Bruno came back and directed, so it happens. Yeah.
And that isn't to, speak ill of Bruno when I was saying that. It's just, he comes across as being, it's that guy that I've seen in so many movies over the years. It just didn't quite feel as unexpected, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. But the other thing is, like, there was, Moses Gunn in Three Men and Adina. Here's a guy who at that, he died within just a few months after that was done. He had been around for so long, and he came in and he just killed that thing.
Yeah.
He just knocked it out of
that
the park.
episode, like from his performance through to just everything else that takes place. It's incredible.
Oh my God.
Yeah. You don't see that on TV.
He was a hero of mine. He was a hero of mine growing up. The first time I ever saw him was on a show called Kung Fu. Do you remember Kung Fu?
Yeah, I know Kung Fu. Yeah.
Yeah. He was on Kung Fu, and I remember seeing this guy in Kung Fu when I was like very young and going, what the heck is that? He's so powerful. Oh my gosh. And I would periodically see him over the years. And then for him to show up on our show and be that guy with just the three of us in a room was a delight. And he was such a professional. And he's so, what a character. That guy, Risley.
So what was your relationship being on the show like as it was happening? And I mean this in terms of as a professional actor. So in I think the first episode of the podcast, you're talking to Reed about the fact that you weren't interested in doing TV. You had a movie career in your sights. You suddenly find yourself on this TV show, which, the critics loved. Audiences probably weren't necessarily there in the numbers that I'm sure people working on the show and NBC was certainly hoping for. But, you eked it out through 7 seasons, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just obviously wasn't like the biggest show in town. Andre was getting quite a bit of attention, and it was pretty clear as that show was going on, people were like, well, Andre's going to go off to a big movie career from this. And you can see him sort of being written out of the show to go and pursue that. Are you also looking at the idea that you want to go off and do movies using Homicide as a springboard towards that? Or were you kind of happy being there doing the work?
Well, I was the one who didn't want to be there. And I was only there for, ostensibly, I was only there for the Three Men and Adina episode, because that's the episode that sold me. And then it kind of brought me in. It just kind of dragged me in. And
look, worse problems to have.
Yeah, worst problems I have. They're being drugged in by incredible artistry. But so by the end of it, truly, I kind of felt I was done with acting. I'd done a lot on that show in 7 years, and I remember when I left the show, I was going to leave in season 6, and then Andre was leaving as well, and I went, maybe I'll stick around one more season just to give it one more. And then if it goes on another season, I'm not going to come back. And when I got out of there, I thought, well, maybe what I'm going to do now is I'm going to direct. That's what I'll do. Maybe I'll direct, because I really enjoyed doing that. And, but I'm kind of done with the acting thing, because everything I was doing after that seemed like Tim Bayliss. And that wasn't why I got into acting. I got into acting to change and it seemed like now I had clearly I was Tim Bayliss, and I couldn't get out of that. And so I didn't want to act any longer. But as it happens, I continued to act and I, directed some short films, but I didn't see myself as that this was going to be a big launching pad for me. In fact, I was kind of into an anti-launch mode by the time I left there. I was kind of done for a bit. I was a little burned out.
Yeah.
Andre capitalized on it.
Yeah, he was doing fine there for a couple of years. It's always weird looking at younger audiences who only know him from Brooklyn Nine-Nine now without sort of knowing the sort of previous
He's brilliant in that.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, just brilliant in that. Yeah, and that's the great thing about having this come back. And now is for people to be able to look back and look like, oh my God, that's where he came from. That's where he was at the beginning. Because he was ready to quit acting before he got Homicide. He had just had another child and he couldn't get jobs, and he was done. And he got this audition, and that was that. But he was going to quit. He was going to do something else.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Pretty common story. I've been recording this other podcast where we're looking at the movies of 1987. And we just started talking about the movie The Stepfather, which I don't know if you remember that at all.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So you've got Terry O'Quinn starring in that. And straight after Stepfather, he gets a lot of attention for it, but just couldn't book anything that wasn't just a serial killer for years afterwards. He's thinking about leaving the industry by the time he sort of hits the early 2000s, and just is like, okay, one more pilot season, I'll do this. He books Lost, and then suddenly career just takes off.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. Amazing how that happens. You hear it all the time. The minute you want to leave, you're brought back into it. It's pretty crazy. It's amazing how it happens in our industry.
Yeah, so look, I mean, you come off Homicide, as you said, you kind of wanted to leave acting. I'm sure the industry is kind of looking at you as sort of being in a sort of one role. I'd also imagine that you've sort of aged to a point where when you leave Homicide, you're booking different types of roles than you probably would have had the chance when you were initially joining Homicide.
And they're roles that I'm just not interested in. I'm not comfortable playing corporate people, lawyers, people that are have a lot of money, that are like, it just was, every time I'd get an audition for that, I did a couple of them, and I just wasn't interested in them. It wasn't why I got into acting in the first place. And I felt like I was being, kind of typecast a little bit that way. And then you
sort of look of a sort, so it kind of makes sense there. Yeah.
But then, of course, people started going, "Oh, he looks really nice. Let's cast him as the bad guy." So that's what started happening. Then we did that flip a little bit for a bit of time, and so I got to play some really wonderful bad guys, and had a great time doing that.
That probably leads into the Veronica Mars of it all, which is, was that a character that you were kind of happy to embrace because of that sort of villainous streak on it? Or was this maybe sort of part of that era? Because that falls into what you're talking about, which is just like rich sort of guy wearing a suit, effectively, for the most of it.
Yeah. And also, I was now starting to become older, like father roles. And that was my first real, I think from what I recall, my first real kind of dad role. And and he was he was good and bad. He was sweet and sour, and it was a great role to play. It was, and a great group of people to be around, and be around all these young people, and to show up and go 10 rounds with them.
When you come across people on the street, do they know you mostly as Tim Bayliss, or is it the Veronica Mars role that probably gets a bit more attention?
Weird. I mean, now it's funny. Now it's Veronica Mars.
Yeah.
It's very weird. I the first time I started, people, talking, saying, "Hey, you're Kyle from Veronica Mars." I went, "Oh, Veronica Mars. That's interesting." But yeah, so it's mostly Veronica Mars. It'll still be Homicide for a certain demographic. And then it'll be also Commander-in-Chief for a smaller amount. Yeah. But I do enjoy, I never was comfortable being in public and people knowing me and calling my name or things like that. So I'm like, actually right now it's a really good time to just be able to be in public and no one knowing who I am. I like that, actually.
I mean, I refuse to believe that, but sure.
I know, yeah. Actually, I do. If someone does come up like once every month or 2 months, will say something, it's really nice to hear. When it was happening all the time, or when it was happening, especially in Baltimore, it's I can see how it really messes with people's heads. It's not natural to have your name called by strangers on the street for people to know you. So to me, who's I think I would say I'm like a more of an introvert. It was stressful.
So look, we've referenced Commander-in-Chief a lot more than I think anyone's referenced Commander-in-Chief in probably about 20 years at this point.
That needs to be referenced.
But look, I mean, this week we're about a week away from what's probably a 50-50 chance of America having its first gentleman of the United States. So back in 2005, you did play America's first gentleman.
Yeah.
I was wondering, do you think much about Doug Emhoff and whether you feel any sort of kinship there at all?
Yeah, I mean, not a huge thing like, by God, I played that, but I'll
Yeah.
go, oh right, I played the First Gentleman. He could be
But
the
like
first
you've done
First
some
Gentleman.
you've done some thinking though about what it is to be a first gentleman. So I mean you're in a bit of a
Yeah,
unique
yeah, yeah,
position.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But when I see him, I think that he feels an awful lot like how I wish that I would have felt while I was doing Commander in Chief. I mean, I think that
Mm.
that's at our best when my character was coming forward, is that it was a Doug Emhoff type character. It was like that. With yeah, where it is an interesting situation to be in. It is an interesting situation.
Well, there's so few examples.
Huh?
Like we've seen so few female presidents on screen. So, even though that was almost 20 years ago now, like it still
Yeah.
feels like, something which is a novelty to discuss.
Yeah, boy, it's hard to talk about this. I mean, we are so close now. It's really, it's funny, the housing market in Los Angeles about 2 or 3 weeks ago, it was really very soft. And now, and people were saying, well, it's because everyone's, they're tight because the election's coming up and no one knows what to do. And now we're 2 weeks out and now they're saying it's not tight anymore. No one can, someone is going to be president. Everyone's just going out and buying stuff now. So it's, the U.S. is all over the place right now. It's like watching the color commentators on. Do you have color commentators on sports networks? There, the ones that are always going back and forth, even if they're 10 goals ahead, they're going, I think that if they just chop it down by 2 or 3, they're only going to be 7 behind, and watch out, because they want to keep your eyes glued to the screen. Something could happen. A miracle could happen. That's what it seems like is going on in America right now. We get thousands of text messages from the candidates on our phones going, here, we're losing Pennsylvania. Donate $35 now. It's ridiculous. It's truly a ridiculous time in America, and scary.
Meanwhile, it's frustrating outside of the United States. Like here in Australia, whoever wins the presidency will have huge impact on what happens globally, but we have no say in being able to do it. Like we're kind of kept at this distance. It's difficult.
Yeah. Good God.
Anyway, let's try to move on from that. Look. So, a couple of months before NBC announced that it's going to remaster the show and bring Homicide back via Peacock, you launched this Substack with remembrances of your time on the show. I was wondering what actually sort of really kickstarted the desires. I mean, you mentioned the passing of Andre and Richard as being sort of, well, I guess mentally started pushing in the direction of thinking about the show again. But why the newsletter? What was your thinking there? And what were you hoping to possibly get out of it?
Well, about a year before, so like in 2023, I had heard about Substack. And I got on Substack and I didn't do anything with it because I didn't have anything to say. Didn't feel I had anything to say. Right around November or so last year, I started writing a lot, and writing short stories and writing with a group, and then helping to put together a reading thing. And it's all short stories. And then Andre passed away, and and after Richard, I sort of started feeling a little bit strange, like, oh, I should reach out, and I was a little bit, and then Andre died, and then I started going, wow, I really should reach out because I felt so strongly about him and felt so strongly about us. And I watched a couple of episodes, and then I realized I don't know what our friendship was. I don't know what anything was on that show. I forget everything. I have like 2 or 3 stories, and that's it. And so I decided, when I thought, okay, I'm going to write about this stuff, then I realized, oh, I can put this up on Substack. And then I just started doing that and just writing through it and seeing where it went and what I remembered. Didn't know quite where it was going to go. Didn't know it was going to, go into a rewatch podcast. Because of writing on Substack, I started reaching out to producers to ask them questions about certain things. Just memories, or was our show, is it because of the music issues, the licensing? And then we started hearing the show was coming back. Then they were getting a hold of me and telling me about the progress that was being made. So now I was in the loop, which was really fun. So I got to be in the loop, and I found out before anyone else, like, that Peacock was going to be releasing it. And then I found out the dates they were going to be releasing it. Then I put myself in contact with Peacock, and I was just kind of a bit of a maniac. And it's been really fun. It's been super fun, and it's been very creative. And writing about the show, and then doing this thing with Reed, and now launching into this other, kind of writing these journals from Bayless's point of view is another, it feels creatively really, it's a really fine period right now.
Had you actively maintained any sort of relationship with people post-show? Or, because you hear about this all the time where, you kind of finish the job and you just move on to the next job, just like people in any other industry.
Oh, I was definitely that guy. I definitely, Andre and I stayed in touch for maybe 2 or 3 years afterwards, and he'd be in LA. We would see each other. Then Clark, I've stayed in touch with him all of this time. We'll see each other if I'm back in New York or if he comes out here. So I've stayed in touch with him. He was the best man at my wedding.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And, we can't get him on the podcast. So my goal is to...
Wait, why can't you get him on there? This devastates me because I'm obsessed with Clark Johnson.
I know. I am. So we try to, throw one good put down, at him every time on every podcast until he comes on. We'll do it. So maybe this month. We'll see. Yeah, okay. He's great. Yeah. He's great. I just love him. And Reed, I hadn't seen Reed in years. And then then I just got a hold of him. I said, hey, you want to do an interview for my Substack thing? And that went so well. And then I said, hey, you want to do this thing? And he was on board immediately, which is great because he's the tech guy.
Yeah. Well, you've both got a really good energy on the podcast together. So, yeah.
Well, we like each other, and that makes
goes a long way.
But he's a live wire, and that's like that. I'm not such a live wire, so he really makes up for that, and he kind of really brings me along, and it's just great. I just love him to death. And he's not on the show for 3 years, so he's got to deal with me as an interview subject for 3 years before he comes on.
I'm suddenly now just thinking about what the Kyle Secor Yaphet Kotto podcast would have been like.
Well, so the person that I thought I would do the podcast with was Clark.
Okay.
I thought Clark would be perfect.
And weren't even...
That became clear. Like, as difficult as it is to get him on a podcast, to have him do this, it would have been a disaster because he knows less than I do about tech. So,
look, that sounds problematic.
Reed was the right guy.
So what has been the response to the newsletter, and how has that changed since the show's landed on Peacock?
Oh, that's a great question. The response has been just great. It's you're on Substack, so it's built. There was already a built-in community of Homicide fans. So it seems like most of them have come onto Substack and are a part of this community. And I've gotten to know so many of them. We do chats and we do things like that. So, for a guy who didn't really like engaging with fans for many, 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 many years, doing this now is just, to me, it's a game changer in my head. And I get to know them and what they're about. And they get to tell me about, what they loved about the show and their personal stories about when they first started watching it. And some of them are writers as well because they're on Substack. And so I encourage them to do their writing. So it's really kind of a weird kind of support group as well, which I really enjoy. And since it's interesting, since it started playing on Peacock, I thought the engagement had kind of gone down a little bit because now they were being fed by the big hunk of meat that they could just all...
Yeah, they didn't need you anymore.
Yeah, they didn't need me anymore. But what they're coming back to the Substack for, to the podcast for, is to kind of go, oh, we saw that. Is that what we saw? is that what we saw? Can you tell us a little bit more about what was happening during that scene or during that episode? And so, and now what's the great thing is that they're coming back to talk about, to kind of support the community and to be in the community and to support each other. And so it's not, a lot of times it's about Homicide, but a lot of times it's about many other things, which I really like. I mean, I can't keep talking about Homicide for 10 years. Can I? I don't think so.
I mean, you say that, but let's see how it goes.
I don't think so.
So you've said that you're someone who's apprehensive about talking to, well, but you're not apprehensive in the past talking to viewers of the show, and we use the word fans, not to be dismissive of fans, but I just find the word fans just a bit awkward. At the best of
got
times.
it. I use viewers. I use that word a lot. Yeah.
I feel more comfortable with viewers.
Okay, good. Yeah.
People just talk about fans, and it's like, well, just because I watch something a lot and really quite like it, does that make me a fan? I'm not too sure, and I've always just found it awkward.
Okay, got it.
But across the US, you've got a lot of fan conventions that take place, and you see a lot of actors, viewer conventions, but they'll call themselves fan conventions, so the phrase holds for the moment. But you've got all these sort of viewer conventions taking place, and I was thinking, I mean, I'm putting it myself in your shoes a little bit. Like, I don't know if this has ever been something you've even half considered, but there'd be the idea of, do people necessarily want to turn out to see a thing from a guy that was in that cop show from years ago? But I think about your body of work, and it actually probably adheres quite well to the sorts of people that are appearing at fan conventions. With appearances in things like Veronica Mars and The Flash, we did 3 episodes as the Icicle. Have you ever considered sort of getting onto that circuit? Because it can be quite lucrative.
I did it once.
Oh, how did it go?
I did one. Well, it was fine. I'm. It's the thing is it feels like for me, I'm being put in a position, or I put myself in a position that isn't. It's not equitable.
Yeah.
It's not. And I don't feel comfortable there. I don't. That's just not something I feel comfortable for. And signing, autographs and people paying money for autographs and all of that. It was an interesting experience, but I didn't get the sense that I wanted to go back and do it again. Although it would be interesting to kind of try it out now and see how I feel about it now. So I'm open to it. But at that point, it was uncomfortable for me. Although I had a great time in interacting with the viewers. Yeah.
Yeah. I get that. So, I mean, as someone sort of running a Substack, there'll be people that I know professionally as well as friends that I'll occasionally see their email coming through saying, oh, they've become a paid subscriber. And I just feel awkward. I'm happy taking money from strangers, but as soon as there's someone else, it's a bit hard. So if I was seeing someone in person and, and you kind of know there's that transaction happening, I think I'd feel very similarly to what you're talking about there.
Yeah. I don't know. So and a lot of people, I mean, it's funny, the Homicide people, for the most part, felt that a similar way. Most of them were kind of shied away from being around people.
Yeah.
I at a certain point, I started running a helping raise money for different organizations. And so I brought all the only time we all came together to do something together was at these end of year gatherings to raise money for organizations. And we would do what basically amounted to, the Homicide talent show. And we would all go up and do something on stage and raise money. But I noticed that most of the actors, except for Richard Belzer, who was really used to that stuff, were they were far more uncomfortable, than I would have imagined all of us to be. We were.
Well, I mean, Belzer's obviously a creature of the stage, so it's, just kind of felt like an extension of what he does.
He just always killed it when he did those. He was a beautiful man. Beautiful man.
Look, I will leave you go in a moment because I've taken up a lot of your time, but
let's talk about
Richard Belzer. So, sorry, where were you heading with this?
Go ahead, let's go to Belzer.
Okay, so Belzer's in a really unique position where obviously Homicide wraps up and he takes his character, packs him up, takes him to New York, and then suddenly he's on Law and Order SVU for like another 20 plus years.
Is it 20 years?
It'd be pretty close to that. So I think Law and Order SVU is like 1999. So the next season after Homicide finished up, he's over
Oh
in New
my
York doing
God.
that. And then he was on that till, what, 2018-ish,
Wow.
I think, if I got my
Wow.
years right.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Anyway,
Wow.
I was thinking for you as someone who's obviously your career had sort of taken a turn where you were saying you were thinking about leaving acting and sort of
Hmm.
leaving Bayless behind, but Belzer, your co-star, is suddenly just still playing that same character, like on your TV every week for years and years. Were you thinking about that much? Like, were you thinking, oh, why isn't Tim Bayless still appearing? And I guess the reason why this is on my
Mm.
mind a little bit is because you are doing these writing exercises where you're getting back into the life of Bayless and
Yeah.
thinking about what he's been doing since. But you'd kind of know that if you'd also been on, Law and Order, Criminal Intent, or whatever, like throughout these
Yeah. Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think the thing that's very freeing to me now is that I get to loosen the shackles of Bayless in a way, and I get to put him in a different situation. I'm not dependent upon other writers to say you're going to be doing this. No, I'm just doing the whole thing.
Mm.
And that's incredibly liberating, and and also it gets to frame uh, the parts of Bayless which are kind of perfect as a spin-off character.
Yeah.
You get to frame these things in a way that, where I get to sort of work, where Bayless gets to sort of work through them in a way that he didn't get to work through them on Homicide, just because of the situation that I've now put the character in. And knowing him, I think knowing him pretty well, I get to speak in a voice that, and it's in a journal kind of way that is incredibly satisfying. And probably around the second journal, I went, damn, this is a really good idea for a spin-off series. So not with me in it, but with a younger Bayless. So I don't know how that would. We'll have to see. We'll have to see how that goes.
Okay, well, just on that, there was some talk from the executives at NBC who are currently on the sales trail trying to sell
Right,
the
right.
Homicide series internationally
Uh-huh.
at the moment. One of the things that I was taking is, oh, we're thinking about maybe doing a remake or,
Mm-hmm.
some sort of continuation of it, reviving the brand. And like part of this is kind of just posturing because they're trying to show this as being a viable, show that everyone should be picking
Sure,
up
sure.
around the place. But let's say that, suddenly traction starts building on this and they start talking about a revival. Would that be something you'd be interested in doing or just.
Well, it would have to be my son, who that I'm very proud of, who has become a homicide detective or something, and I'm the proud papa. I don't know. I mean, in a way, you could take like the journals of Bayless, and you could go, this is a back door into that,
Mm.
of coming back into Baltimore from going off and doing something like this, and he shows up in a spin-off series somehow. But I don't think it would be me. I think they would unless they're going to bring back Clark and myself and Danny and like all the Reed, and we're going to somehow be this strange geriatric detective group that's going to kick ass all over Baltimore. I don't know, it's sounding better by the second, actually.
You could just be running the bar across the street.
That's exactly it. And periodically do a little murder investigation.
Oh, you have to.
Yeah.
Just scratch the itch.
Yeah. So, I mean, it'd be fascinating if they did that, but they took long enough bringing Homicide back to the air, so I don't know if we're gonna, need to hold our breaths.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, I'd be very curious, but also I'm a big believer that people should just let things die. Like, it's kind of just,
I think so too.
let it be.
Sometimes they need
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
But it was really cool. I mean, it was so cool to read your article. When I saw that, it was like, oh my God, I hadn't heard of that.
Yeah.
And
Look,
it was
I mean,
really.
yeah, as someone
Go ahead.
internationally who I'm waiting to see it actually get sold into our local territory, like, I was very excited to see that news come through.
And it was about 3 days later that this friend of mine, who my wife is staying with in Melbourne, they were on the phone with me, and she said, "Kyle, when is it coming to Australia?" And I said, "What's the name of that streaming network there?" She goes, "Is it Binge?"
Yeah, there's one called Binge, yeah.
Binge, yeah. And I said, "I think it's going to come there sooner than you think, and I think it's going to be on Binge, according to Dan."
Look, so I've talked to a couple of mates who are working in various streaming services in Australia, and nobody's picked it up yet. But also, the general consensus was this is something that they're going to be selling at the MIPCOM TV conference in France last week. So you never know what may have happened in the last couple of days.
Wait, did they not sell it? Did they not make any? Wasn't it Israel and Canada?
Well, yeah, that was like some early sales. So like
Okay,
they kind of do these small little interviews to trade press to try to build a little bit of activity so that when they do hit MIPCOM, they can then say, hey, look, that thing that you read about on Deadline 2 weeks ago, like here it is, think about buying it. Like it's all part of the game.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
So anyway, we'll see how it comes out. But I'd be pretty surprised if it isn't picked up by someone. If the price is right, like it's such an easy buy. I think that when you look at that cast, when you think about the critical interest in it over the years, as long as, NBC aren't asking sort of crazy money for it, it'd be a slam dunk purchase, I think.
I think NBC will take whatever. I mean, to a point.
Okay, so we're not looking at a post-career for you selling the program internationally, because I don't think that's necessarily the message they want to take to market.
No, they will. I am exactly the person to put out there, and all they would have to do is give me a price. Give me a price, and I'll say I can sell it for that price. I could do it. I could do it. But I think that NBC, I think that they wanted to look. They took a long time to get this on. A long time, and it was a lot of it was music rights, but there are other things as well. So now that they have, they were trying to do anything other than Peacock, and they did Peacock. So, I think they're going to make deals.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say we're going to, they're going to sell it for $1, but I think they're going to make, I think they're going to make great deals. And I think that everyone's going to be happy, and people around the world are going to see Homicide again and, be turned on by the idea of being able to make movies or TV shows for very little money with one camera and a Chinese lantern.
That's probably an excellent note to end on. Kyle, thank you very much for your time. And if people want to check out the Substack, the address is...
Oh, it's gosh, very good. I believe it's Substack, Kyle.Secor Substack.
Gosh.
Just go to Substack and go Kyle Secor, and it'll come up.
People, look at the screen. I'll have put it on a little super down the bottom.
Yes, yes, in the show notes.
Absolutely. Check the show notes. You can click a link. Otherwise, just do a search for Kyle Secor. You'll find him very easily on Google.
And at Homicide LOR is where you can see our, get our podcast or on any other, Apple, any Spotify, and also YouTube. You can watch Homicide Life on repeat.
Yeah.
And we're there too.
Look, it's fantastic. Kyle, again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dan. Great seeing you.